All right, and I'll put up our presentation. All right. So our next topic that we'll be getting into for at least this Saturday is getting more in depth into the facilitation skills. Now, we've went over the basics of helping with attending and listening. And now we're going to go even deeper into how these skills play out and how they're used in different aspects of the group process or even the individual therapy process. Okay. But where I want to start with in this lecture is what is facilitation skills? Okay. And why do we call it group facilitation instead of group leadership or a therapist group led thing or treatment? Is that what our primary job is as facilitators of a group is to guide and direct key parts of our work. Okay. So a facilitator is someone who helps a group meet their goals. And this is really important when we think about developing the group in the first place. The lectures that you'll be listening to between now and the next time we meet live will talk about group development and group cohesion. And part of that is giving ownership of the group to the group members and having them establish the goals, the expectations, and all of those things for an effective group meeting and group treatment. Okay. And so we'll talk about this in the development of group, and this lecture will probably make a lot more sense once you go through those series of lectures on groups and group development. But just think of it as facilitators. We want the group or help the group meet their goals. Okay, there's three principles of group facilitation. One is to draw out opinions and ideas. So this is getting people to talk, getting people to tell their story, making sure that all group members' opinions and ideas are heard, that focus on the how and what. I know that there are, I mentioned, I think last week there's something called process groups, which are usually done after someone has gone through the how and what groups. Okay. Because when we're doing initial treatment groups, so this would be domestic violence survivor groups, alcohol and drug treatment groups, relapse prevention groups, trauma groups. What we want to do is focus on the how and what, but not the why. Okay. And the reason behind that is that we have found that treatment of a person's symptomology, if we want to do that, or the healing process for an individual really is best facilitated by understanding how and what the person is experiencing here and now. Not when the trauma started, not why the addiction started, why the abuse started, why all of those things. Those tend to interfere with healing initially. Okay. But focusing on how the person is experiencing their symptoms or trauma here and now at the age, the place that they're at tends to facilitate healing much quicker. And then after learning all the coping skills, all of the treatment skills that they learn, then in a process group or with a therapist, then maybe if they still want to, can explore the why did they go through that experience. Okay. And then the third principle of facilitation is never taking sides. Um, and we'll talk later about preferences. I'm sorry, I have never met a parent who says that they treat their children the same and they treat their children the same. Um, I will even say this, and I just kind of want to drive this point home, is that we find that biases and taking sides largely can occur on a very unconscious level. Okay. And so I'm going to take grade school teachers as well, preschool, kindergarten, grade school teachers as an example. Probably most well-meaning teachers will say, I treat all of my students the same. I treat them from where they're at. I don't have biases because of where they come from or who they are. Okay. I think most well intentioned teachers do that. Okay. But let's measure that. And in the research that I've seen, they kind of rate the children on, and I don't want to say this in adult term, but the attractiveness of the child. Okay. So, they have children, the children who don't always come clean, showered, all those kinds of things versus the children who do, all, coming from a well-to-do versus the low income or hand-me-down type families where the clothes aren't always new and fresh. Okay, that's kind of the measure that was used. And what they found is even the teachers who swore that they treat all their students the same tended to give the attractive students more attention, more positive feedback, and more one-on-one direction, where they tended to give the quote unquote less attractive students more negative feedback, more harsh consequences, less attention, and less one-on-one time. Okay, so why am I bringing this up? Not to say that those intentions aren't good and it's not something we should avoid. It's something we should work towards. What I'm trying to say is it is natural um, for human beings to uh, take sides, either unconsciously or consciously, favor some people over other people. And so this is another one of those areas where I would encourage you to look at, again, your preferences, your biases, and whatnot, because I've seen doing supervision, especially of groups, where a facilitator will tend to start giving some group members more attention, more this, more that, and they tend to ignore other group members, and they don't realize they're doing it. And so a lot of those times we'd have to record the group session and have the facilitator watch. And 99% of the time, the facilitator goes, I didn't realize I was doing that. I didn't realize I was giving them more attention than these other group members. So pay attention to that, because sometimes we don't do it consciously. Okay, but those are the three principles. Again, draw out opinions and ideas, focusing on the how and what, and never take sides, and work on the unconscious propensity to favor some over others. Okay. So let's talk about encouraging participation. Okay. First of all, these are some things to always kind of feel the room whenever you're in a group setting. One is check comfort levels. Okay. Again, this is attending. So not only to yourself and what you're feeling, but your clients as well. So if your clients are starting to get closed off, if they're not doing the eye contact that they normally do, if they're doing avoidance behavior, if they're doing distracting behaviors, that are indications that there's something not comfortable in the group room. So not only are we supposed to be paying attention to our own attending emotional experience to help facilitate the group, paying attention to our group members and how they're reacting to what's going on is important. Okay. Allow all ideas to be heard. Okay. And this is giving everyone space to be able to talk and express themselves. And yes, sometimes it means that there has to be some time management put into the group process because there are groups where one or two group members want to dominate most or if not all the conversation. So you may have to have some tricks in your bags, like having the talking stick. Okay, and they get the talking stick for a certain amount of time and then they have to pass the talking stick on. That's a common one. I've seen some facilitators use one of those minute glass things where the sand, and when the sand is out, then you encourage them to kind of wrap up what they're saying and say we'll come back to you if we have time, those kind of things. And but we do want to try and avoid that um, in the beginning. So we want to use the skills that we'll be learning over the course of this course to try and make it so the group naturally lends time for each of the group members. Okay. Make members feel good about their contributions. Okay. This is again relating what you heard the group member said, validating what they said, and modeling that for your group members. Because what you want to happen is that instead of you doing the reflecting and the um, um, uh, validating, you want your group members to take that over. So you want, Bob over there saying, "Hey, John, what you just said that really had an impact on me when you mentioned this and this and this. Thank you for expressing that." Okay. Ideas and decisions should be a group not should be group nominated, meaning that if the group wants to explore something more in depth, it should be something that the entire group decides upon and not just a few group members saying, "Hey, I think we should do this," or "I think this would be a good thing." This really comes down to one of the skills that we want to that we'll talk about in this section is advice giving. Okay, there is giving advice and there's facilitating change. Okay, giving advice is when we use our personal experience and tell a person what they should do with that based on our personal experience. Okay, facilitating change is providing ideas, providing solutions, and allowing the person to integrate that into their own experience about what they experienced, not what the person experienced. And this is an important skill because again, even if you work in a field for 20 years and you see the same kind of situation over and over and over, the solutions that may most commonly work or what worked for one person does not necessarily mean that it will work for that um, other person. Because again, I'm willing to bet if I were to ask you all at the end of this lecture to write down the things that you heard, you would all write something slightly different, slightly, and sometimes you might even mention things that I didn't even say because our minds wander. Okay. I would be willing that even though we're all hearing the same lecture, we are all experiencing it differently, and we will all take something different away from this experience. Okay. Which means that the solution that works for, let's say Rhonda may not work for Mia or Harold, okay? Because we're all experiencing things slightly different. So when in the group setting, when a group member says, you know, when I was faced with that, this is what I did. Yeah, and that's a very common response and a very human response in a lot of ways. Your job as a group facilitator is to say, so this is what John said and what he did in that situation. Do you feel like that is something that would work for you? Or do you think, that that just wouldn't work in your situation? And using what that person said as a catalyst for helping that person reach what would work for them. And that's the idea here between ideas and decisions should be group nominated, because what you're doing is you're facilitating. There was the advice from group member A. Now let's try to use that as a springboard for maybe a catalyst, a possible change for another group member. Okay. I don't know if that makes sense or if I'm just babbling at this point. Okay. The last thing about encouraging participation is being supportive. Okay. For that may just mean that when the person who doesn't like talking very much finally talks, giving that give extra little bit of praise and thanking them for stating whatever they stated. It can also mean just simply um, providing understanding that even though they may be going through crisis, that it can be worked through. Okay. So those are all things about encouragement, encouraging participation. And again, what these things do is they reduce a lot of the conflict and resistance that a lot of individuals have when they're entering some type of group treatment. Okay. So why do we need these facilitation skills? We'll get through this really quick. If we um, if we facilitate correctly, if we um, um, uh, do our jobs the best we can. Okay. I'm going to start down here because in every class that I have taught for group techniques and counseling techniques, this is always the number one thing that a lot of students want to know is when there's conflict in the group, when there's conflict in the helping process, what do I do? How do I resolve it? Okay. Well, the first part of resolving conflict is through being an effective facilitator and using these skills. By using these skills, conflict doesn't become divisive. It doesn't become aggressive. It becomes another way or opportunity to change. The other reason you do this is when conflict does arise, you are modeling the skills of how to get through that conflict. Okay. The other one is that these facilitation skills, having good facilitation skills, increase the quality of our communication. It increases our clients' soft skills through the modeling. It provides the opportunity for group members to step into leadership roles and leadership responsibilities. Okay. And it keeps members involved and it helps facilitate planning. Okay. And part of facilitation is good planning. And that's an important thing to note. Okay. So with this, um, there's 4 areas of being a good facilitator. Okay. Okay. First is understanding the goals of the group and understanding what the purpose of that group is. Okay. Um, and this is especially important when your group is not a structured group. A structured group is where you use a manual. Each group has its goals and its worksheets and its conversations that you're supposed to have. This is really important when you're doing very unstructured groups, where yes, each group has a topic, but the way you go about exploring that topic is really left up to the facilitator and their skills and their abilities. Okay. And again, one example of this is when I used to do and supervise psychoeducational domestic survivor groups, okay, which tended to be unstructured. Yes, you went over the power and control wheel. You went over, what it means to go back if a survivor chooses to, what it means to move forward if the survivor chooses to. And all of those are topics that should be covered, but it's really up to the facilitator to decide when and where those topics will be covered. Okay. At least in the old days, I think they have some manualized groups today, but that it's an example of such group. Making sure that you understand those goals, because again, I'm thinking of when I did supervision, there were groups that were led by facilitators where the topics of the goal and the goals of the group were very seldom mentioned. They became instead groups of just I don't mean to make this sound harsh, but they became complaining groups where people came together and just complained about their week and about what they were going through. And I'm not saying there's not a space for that, but the goals of the groups were never accomplished. Okay. Keeping the group and agenda moving forward. Okay. This means, again, making sure that the group is meeting their goals. They're meeting where they should be in the treatment process if it's a treatment group, the educational components if they're in a psychoeducational group, and moving them and moving through the process. Okay. This is really important when you have court-ordered groups. Okay. So I'm thinking about anger management, which I believe anger management, there's a 52 week and a 24 week, if I remember right. And there's for the 24 week, there's 24 topics that that facilitator needs to get through in order to meet the intent of that anger management group. Okay. And that takes making sure that agendas and everything continually move along with the group members. Okay. Involving everyone, making sure that everyone has the opportunity to talk. And sometimes that means the quiet group members, you purposely stopping the group and asking that individual if they'd like to contribute or if they have anything that they can add to the discussion. And then the fourth one is decisions should be made democratically. Okay. And that's establishing the goals and the needs of the group, when the group will meet, when the group will start, the rules that the group develops. Again, when you go through the group lectures, the group development lectures, it'll talk about group rules and how every group should start with a basic set of rules, such as confidentiality, being on time, all of those other things. But you should always give the opportunity for groups to add rules. Okay. And I will tell you in my experience, and I mentioned this in those lectures, Some groups are just okay with the basic rules. I've had other groups who say, you know what, we don't want any gum chewing, or you shouldn't bring in big jugs of water or soda, or and so there's other groups who develop a lot more. Okay, but allowing the group to have ownership of that through democratically developing things like rules and whatnot for the group. Okay. The other part is planning a good process. Okay. And again, the group doesn't start at the starting time of the group. Okay. For the facilitator, the group should start about 45 to 30 minutes before the group actually starts, where the facilitator goes over the goals for the group, goes over your notes from things that were said by group members last week, by reviewing the clients that will be there. And then it's going in and making sure that the climate of the room is comfortable, the environment, it doesn't have any messes or garbage everywhere, or overstimulating things. The logistics, does again, is there going to be a sign on the door that says group in process, all of those things. And then the room arrangement, making sure that the room is ready for the group members when they come into the group setting. These are kind of the checklists of things that we really should make sure are there when we are going to start a group or start the group process. Okay. And then we set some common ground rules. Okay. So we're talking group one. Okay. So this is a basic list that you may want to start with, is one person talks at a time. If you need, raise your hands, listen to others, no mocking or attacking, being on time, respect each other. Um, and and then you can ask the group members, is there any other rules that we want for our group? Okay. Now, when you're doing rules, it is important for you to provide examples of what it means one person talks at a time. Okay. You need to model raising your hand. You need to give examples of what mocking or attacking another person is, such as snickering as one example, versus saying what you just said is ridiculous is another example. Okay. And then, of course, being on time, I will say, I've worked with facilitators who tended to be late for their own groups, and their group membership usually started off with the 6 to 9 individuals, and within a couple weeks it was down to 1 or 2. So modeling yourself being there on time and respecting your group members' time and place. Okay, those are all ways that we need to make sure that we model these common ground rules. Okay. So let's talk now, and I think we'll finish up with this part. I think maybe I want to talk about just the basics of a meeting process. Okay. So this is kind of an outline if you're developing a group, or when you're thinking about how should I facilitate a group. If you're doing a manualized group and it doesn't tell you, you start with this and you end with this, this is a way to put those manualized elements into your group. So again, we start with on time. You welcome and thank everyone for coming and being there and being a part of the group. Um, Make introductions. If it's an open group, you want to introduce the new group members. I would do introductions for the first 2 groups if it's a closed group. Then you want to review the agenda and the objectives, and again, the ground rules of the group and what we're going to cover today, what our goals for today are. And then you want to encourage participation, saying, it's important that we all engage in this. Stick to the agenda and seek commitments. Okay. Make sure you bring closure to each item. Okay, so if you have 3 things you need to discuss in a group, we're going to go over a skill called summarizing, where you will summarize where you started on that topic, what what your group discussed, and where we're heading with that topic. Okay, bring closure. So, and then again, summarizing results and follow up at the end of the group. Okay. So at the end of the group, you want to kind of give an overview of what was said, what was done, and this is a good place to bring up quotes or paraphrases from group members and provide a good um, um, uh, summary of what happened in that group. And this is another good way to show that you were attending and listening. And it's going to make your group members feel like, oh wow, this is a really engaging place, and I can come here and I can be listened to. Okay. And then, so summarize results and do some follow-up, saying getting commitments to group members to practice a skill through the next week, thank participants, and then close the meeting. However you close a meeting, okay? Yeah. So, anyways, and so this is kind of just a basic outline if you want to develop a group of a way to kind of think about how to structure it. Okay. So again, this is another way to kind of stay to prevent things like disruptions and whatnot, is get agreement early on that we will all have the ability to talk and express ourselves. You yourself use those listening and attending skills, listen and show respect, model that for your group members. Learn expectations of the group. And again, going back to the encourages thing, relax and stay cool. Okay. And this again, these 5 things tend to be preventative ways of having group interruptions and group negative group conflict. Okay. Doesn't always work, but it can really help reduce it. Okay. Intervention on disruptions, we're going to get to when we get to conflict resolution. I always um, um, put that slide there, and I haven't moved it yet. So I'm going to move that down to when we get to our conversation on group conflict. But I want to spend a little bit of time talking about probably one of the most primary skills that a facilitator, a therapist, a social worker really should work on developing. And this is a concept known as emotional intelligence. Okay. And in its most basic form, we're going to define emotional intelligence as the ability to perceive and express emotions, assimilate emotions in thoughts, understand and reason with emotions, and regulate emotions in the self and with others. Okay. So I want to talk about the difference between empathy and emotional intelligence. Okay. Because if you read a lot of the literature, they use the word empathy. You got to have empathy for your clients. Empathy is very important. Okay. It's not just a buzzword. It's not just this thing. It's actually a very important thing that we do need to develop. So I want to start with the concept of empathy. Okay. Empathy, in its most basic definition, is the ability to feel and understand what another person is feeling and understanding. Okay. And it comes from a very human thing that develops. We're going to go way into your childhood when you were about 24 to 36 months of age. Okay. Um, you may have heard this if you've taken the human development class or in the Psych 101 class, but around 24 to 36 months of age, we develop something called theory of mind. Okay. Before there's theory of mind, and theory of mind is a child's ability and an adult's ability at that as well to understand that I have emotions and feelings and thoughts of my own, and someone else may have different emotions, thoughts, and feelings separate from mine. And when we develop that separation between my emotions and someone else's emotions, we start to develop theories of why that person is feeling the way they're feeling and we're feeling the way we are. So, this is when a child is really happy. Maybe they're really happy, but they notice mom crying. And so they go up to mommy and ask, Mommy, why are you crying? Because they're understanding they're experiencing a different emotional state than mom is. Okay. The neurological basis of this is something called mirror neuroning. Okay. Mirror neuroning is when we watch the physical behaviors of someone else and we pay attention to those physical actions. The neurons that are firing in their head start to fire in our head, meaning that our neurons actually become connected with each other. Okay. One of the examples I give this in the human development class is that if you're ever at a movie and you're kind of bored and there's an action scene where the actor is moving around a lot, maybe they're doing a car wreck and they have to avoid a bullet and stuff like this. If you watch the audience that are paying really attention to the movie, they will start to move too. Okay. Because what we found is that the neurons that were firing in the stunt person's head when they were doing that stunt actually start to fire in the movie viewers' brains. Okay. Um, Another example of mirror neuroning is dating. Okay. Again, you can watch this if you ever go to a restaurant and you're one of these weirdos like me who like watching people and seeing what they do, and you notice a couple who are on their first date. You can always predict if they're going to have a second date if they start parroting or mimicking each other by the end of the date. So at the beginning of the date, they're sitting the way they're comfortable. They have their fork and knife where they want it, and their drinks are where they want it. But if by the end of the date they are aligned with each other, their legs are positioned in the same position, they're sitting in the same posture, their forks and knives are in the mirrored position, and when one person drinks, the other person drinks. When one person digs up some food and puts it in their mouth, the other person does it too, almost in this very synchronous way. You know they're going to have a second date. If that isn't happening, you can bet whoever you're with, and you can go out and say, did she say she would go on a second date with you? And you could bet your friends 25, $50 that they'll say no. And you'll usually get 25 or $50. It's kind of a fun thing to do if you like messing with people's lives. No, I'm just kidding. Anyways, what's happening in that couple when they start doing that parroting and mimicking is because they're paying such close attention with each other that their neurons start to fire the same. Their brains actually sync, if you want to put it this way, together, where you could almost take a brain scan of them and you wouldn't be able to tell which one is which. Okay. So that mirror neuroning then leads to theory of mind that then leads to the development of empathy, being able to experience what other people are experiencing. Okay. Now, there are people with very low mirror neuroning theory of mind ability, and there's people, I think I see the popular word, they're called empaths, that are very sensitive to the emotions and feelings of other people and really feel other people. And we're all kind of on a range on this area. And I would encourage you to there are some online kind of quizzes that you could see what your empathy level is, blah, blah, blah. But that's not important because empathy is not enough to help. Okay. There are people who are high in empathy that create more chaos and damage than a person with no empathy at all. Okay. And I've seen I've worked with some group facilitators who are low in empathy, but they know they're low in empathy and they're amazing facilitators and therapists. Okay. My point being is empathy is not enough to help someone. We also need this thing called emotional intelligence that largely develops after about 36 months, and our natural emotional intelligence develops up until around the age of 6 or 7. Okay. But that doesn't mean just like, if, your natural math ability might be addition and subtraction, that doesn't mean you can't learn multiplication and division later on. So I want to be careful by saying natural, that the stuff that comes easy to you with emotional intelligence develops around up until about the age of 6, but we can learn more after that. But emotional intelligence is, I don't know if any of you, I'm trying to think of someone who just walks in the room and they just have an air of charisma. Okay. They can walk in the room and it's like they understand where everyone is at. They can go up to each person and go, geez, it's just good to see you, and seem to always be able to say the right thing. And they can even do it when they've had a bad day or they're going through life issues and they just seem to be able just to do that. That is someone who is highly emotionally intelligent, because they're able to understand their own emotional state and also the emotional state of other people, and they're able to negotiate those things and be able to integrate and say the right kind of things that make people feel like they belong there. Okay. And so this is where I am going to kind of stop and we'll get into more on emotional intelligence. These are some other things that have been used to talk about emotional intelligence: executive competency, interpersonal communication, relationship management. It's also been called social intelligence, leadership development. Um, these are all things that go along with emotional intelligence. But because this is an individual skill and we're coming to this course with all different types of emotional intelligence abilities, some of us can be highly skilled in one area and some of us may be others. Some of us, some of us walk in a room and kind of don't understand anything. I put myself partly in that category. Um, and so what I want to do at this point is I want to stop sharing. Okay.